Not every controversy begins with an opinion. Sometimes it actually begins with a spreadsheet. Dr. Paul Sullins was doing what any honest researcher does, checking the data, testing the conclusions, and asking basic scientific questions.
I was replicating a study that looked at child outcomes by family structure, and I found that the outcomes for emotional problems and psychological conditions and going to a therapist were all 2 to 3 times higher for the children that were with same-sex parents than were with man-woman parents. So I went to a conference and I presented this result, thinking that people would yawn and say, "Oh, isn't that nice?" And it was a furor.
What he found out wasn't just challenged; it was shut down, not because it was false, but because it was unwelcomed. And suddenly he wasn't treated like a scientist, he was treated like a threat. So today we explore why certain findings explode into cultural firestorms and why some topics can't be touched. Welcome to the Love Questions podcast, where faith meets culture, questions spark conversations, and the truth is spoken with love. Welcome to the Love Questions podcast. My name's PJ. And I'm here with my friend, Professor Paul Sullins. Great to meet you, sir. Thanks. Well, not meet you. Great to have you on.
Yeah, nice to be here, PJ.
Yeah, so great to. I've seen your material. I've heard you lecture, and it's an incredible honor to have you on and begin discussions. I do feel like I've learnt just from you so much already, and I thought maybe I could just ask you a little bit about what you do. I know you've done research in sociology for many years. And in retirement, you decided to make things a little more interesting, to get into the controversial stuff.
Yeah, in 2014, I examined the largest public health database in the world, the National Health Interview Survey of the United States. And I was replicating a study that looked at child outcomes by family structure that had been done by the CDC in 2010. And so I was looking to see what had changed in the last 5 years, a very innocuous, central, sociological kind of study. And I thought, well, with these data, we could identify which of these parents are same-sex parents. And I said, I wonder how that would compare to the other findings. So I looked into it, and I found that the outcomes for emotional problems and psychological conditions and going to a therapist and receiving psychotropic medication were all 2 to 3 times higher for the children that were with same-sex parents than were with man-woman parents. So I went to a conference and I presented this result, thinking that people would yawn and say, "Oh, isn't that nice?" And it was a furor. I got yelled at. People got up, walked out of the room. They said, "No, this can't be right." Blah blah. And so I got drawn into the contentious public culture war issues that were going on. This was the run-up to gay marriage. The whole gay establishment wanted to suppress any idea that children did not turn out as well with same-sex parents. And so there was all of this contentious literature going back decades. Well, I knew nothing about that literature, but I found out very quickly. And so I ended up writing an amicus for the Obergefell case, and then getting drawn into more research on same-sex parents. You may know Mark Regner's and all those studies. And then started doing research on abortion, which has always been very contentious, showing and finding distress for women who had abortions, and then finding that about 20% of women in the U.S. who have had an abortion of a child that they said they wanted to keep. And so the whole idea that abortion is of unwanted children was not true. And published that, and then looked at a number of other issues, and got in 2020 into the issue of same-sex attraction. A study was published in mid-2020 using excellent data on the gay population in the United States, the very first actual random sample survey of what they call sexual minority population. So it's LGBT, anything that's not heterosexual, right? Okay. And from those data, tried to show that the persons who had been to so-called conversion therapy were almost twice as suicidal as those who had not been to conversion therapy. And so they publicly posted those data on a data repository. I got the data, I looked at it, and as I looked at it, I couldn't believe my eyes. They had failed to do a very basic procedure in looking at outcomes for persons, and what that is to control for pre-existing conditions. Yeah. So if you want to tell how many people are suicidal following an intervention of some sort, or have any outcome following, you need to look at the persons who were subject to that condition beforehand. Yeah. You know, if you want to know how many people get depressed from something, you have to know how many were depressed beforehand. Otherwise, you're just measuring before and after the same.
Experimental group, control group.
Exactly.
This is Science 101.
Science 101.
You naively thought, I think, I'm gleaning, you naively thought that if you just discovered what the data showed and reported that you could avoid ideology.
No. So I published a study.
Sorry, I'm not calling you naive. I'm saying you're an innocent scientist and you get drawn into...
Just like that. And so I published a study that was a rebuttal of that study. Because when I did impose a control for pre-existing, let's say suicidal ideation, that's thoughts of suicide. Have you ever had thoughts of suicide? When did you begin? When did you end? How many have you had? And I found that over 2/3 of the thoughts of suicide for the people that had been to so-called conversion therapy, they had before they went to the therapy. Wow. So in fact, it wasn't that the therapy was making them suicidal. The therapy was helping them not to be suicidal. Wow. And so you can imagine someone is particularly prone to suicidal thought. They say, I need help. And so among the types of help that they seek, they will also sometimes seek sexual reorientation discussions. You know, maybe it is this same-sex attraction that is contributing to my distress, and how can I deal with that? Could I maybe not be as same-sex attracted or same-sex attracted?
Which, by the way, was the mainstay of therapy up until, the later stages of the sexual revolution. Right. So this is not a Christian idea. This was a therapeutic idea, but that shifted rapidly.
Christian counselors have almost never done conversion therapy. It was mainstream psychologists up through 1975 that did conversion therapy. They called it that, and they were trying to turn gay people straight. It was a failure. It used lots of unpleasant, aversive techniques, like giving people drugs to make them vomit and stuff, and that whole idea. If you know the theory of B.F. Skinner and operant conditioning, that whole idea has been disproven nowadays. Nobody does anything like that, but that's the label that's pasted on. Christian counselors today that will talk to people about their trouble with same-sex attraction.
And we could just say here and now, no one wants that. No one wants to, if that's what conversion therapy is, nobody wants to do that. No one wants anything coercive. No one wants to emphasize sexual orientation. I think we're concerned with the well-being of the human, the whole of human.
Right, absolutely. So I published the study, and it again was met with a furor. All the big-name LGBT scholars wrote commentaries saying, "Oh, my rebuttal study should never have been published, and it should be taken down." But I was the one who was following normal science and proving the other side wrong, but I was too effective, so they want to, remove it. And so that has led to, more and more controversy, and got me more into this, and led to the study that we may be talking about today, which is a survey of persons who have ever desisted from same-sex life. And I put it in those broad terms because that would span persons who discovered themselves to be same-sex attracted and said, I don't want to go down the path of gay or lesbian life. And so they preemptively take efforts to be able to live in heterosexual relationships, or at least to avoid homosexual sex. And so it's from that to persons who lived for years as lesbian, gay, or one of the other many identities that someone could have. We even have a couple of persons who are in same-sex marriages who are in these data. And so anyone who has, and the title of the study is Leaving Pride Behind. Okay. So anyone who has moved away from the pride idea, was eligible for our survey. So we have 188 persons.
Okay, can I just say, these people don't exist, Paul.
Yeah, that's what they say, isn't it?
But you found that that's not true.
No, it's absolutely not true. And there's lots of prior studies that show that they do exist. Are
these like Christian Catholic studies, or do you think there's actually a broader body of evidence that demonstrates that people do change and have left? And
a much broader body of evidence. One of the most prominent studies was done by Dr. Robert Spitzer, who was the head of the Council of the American Psychiatric Association that approved the removal of homosexuality from the list of pathologies in 1973. Now, it might have been 74, 75. There were a lot of ins and outs there, but he was the one who approved and spearheaded that effort back then. 30 years later, he says, to be fair, I want to see if people actually can change sexual orientation. And so he did one of the most prominent studies showing that, in fact, he had 200 persons he interviewed. Most of them were able to change sexual orientation from something not heterosexual to heterosexual. And many of them moved part of the way in terms of attraction and part of the way in terms of behavior, but also a number of them moved all of the way. Now, he is a secular psychologist. He's a promoter of gay rights, but he was an honest researcher, and he wanted to show that, yes, people who are comfortable with being homosexual, it should not be thought of as being pathological. It should not be a psychological disorder. But on the other hand, if someone is troubled by that, they should have the right to seek therapy in order to overcome that. And so he talked about ego-dystonic homosexuality. That is, homosexuality that is not acceptable to the person's view of themselves, in other terms, and causes psychological distress or disintegration. Well, his study met with so much furor and call for it to be retracted. They published a whole book of commentaries denouncing it, a lot of vitriol, and he was, I won't say drummed out of the profession because he was of retirement age by this time, but he was essentially canceled before that became a thing, back in the early 2000s, because he had dared to publish this study. And to this day, many of the LGBT activists will not use that study and will denounce it. But the editor of the journal, who was another honest scientist, said, there's nothing wrong with this study. I mean, you don't like it, but that doesn't make it wrong. That doesn't constitute an argument against it.
Well, this is what I'm trying to grapple with. My background's in medical science and medicine, and I'm not practicing in that way now, so I'm not presenting myself as an expert. But what I did glean from the professors and academics that I learnt from was a high degree of academic integrity. You know, a desire for veritas, a desire for truth. It's the Harvard motto. It's we want to find out what's what, and then we can make sense of that. But I just don't know how. I'm like struggling to understand how people in positions could just disregard, high positions, just disregard the outcomes and produce well, we see it all the time actually, produce a commentary, a conclusion section that's quite different to the results.
Yeah. Well, the corruption in science today is pervasive, as many of us know, and not just on this issue. But when you have science that is surrounded by lots of money, I mean, you have the publication giants nowadays. You have 4 or 5 very large corporations that control most of scientific publication. They make billions of dollars a year. And then you have all of the universities and the academic centers. And then, of course, if you get into, let's say, studies on drug outcomes, you have all the pharmaceutical companies that are paying to promote their own. So we learned, I think, for many of us, our first exposure to this was in the debates over smoking. Did it cause cancer or not? And you had this whole series of studies which were false, were fraudulent, but they were paid for by the cigarette companies to show that no, it's correlation, but it's not causation. And then, of course, with other topics and studies, you find that if there's a bit of controversy about it, it's very difficult to get good science because you have these ideological interests on both sides. Now, and whatever your view is of the COVID experience, there was a lot of ideological science on both sides.
Yeah.
And in climate change, I think there's good evidence for the fact that our climate is changing, and some of it is through human effort, but there's a lot of ideology around that, a lot of scare tactics, and we've discovered groups of scientists that are trying to influence editors not to publish studies from other sides. And, in the United States, we have found that even the heads of our government-funded research agencies are writing to persons in power saying, we need to prevent the publication of this study. It'll just upset the public or mislead the public or something. They just don't want the truth to come out.
This came out in a trans publication recently.
Yeah.
The authors acknowledged withholding the results because they didn't want the ideological outcome that it might bring. Can you just shed a little bit of light on that?
Yeah, I don't know much about that particular incident, but I have personally been told by persons in a position to publish or to approve studies that they don't want my work to be published because they see me not as providing an alternative interpretation or hypothesis about certain data, but as, and these are their words, weaponizing the data for anti-gay or socially hostile ends. And so from their ideological perspective, this is pernicious information that should not be made known to the public. So it's very similar to persons who were questioning the use of vaccines in certain situations, or persons who are questioning limiting economic activities in certain ways that are going to have some predicted small effect on the warmth of the earth, in decades down the road. And so we have this overmastery of an LGBT ideology in many areas of social science that just screen out anything that, from their point of view, may lead to a political position that they just don't like, and we've seen it. I think very clearly in the transgender movement. Yeah.
So we, even going back to, you're familiar with the book After the Ball, the gay activism book out of the 80s. But I believe there was an admission in that book. We know people do change.
Yes.
Their sexual orientation.
Yeah. Right.
But it's crucial that we argue that they don't.
Right. Because that is one of the linchpins of the larger point that they want to make, which is that homosexual attractions are innate, inborn, and therefore they are normal and natural.
And a human right. They can be, if they're immutable, they can become a human right that's defensible under law.
That's right. In the U.S. we would call it a protected class, so that they're not only have a right to certain rights and prerogatives, but they also are protected from discrimination and mistreatment, what they call mistreatment. So if you say to a gay couple, I can't perform your marriage, right? In certain circumstances, you could be liable for discrimination,
right.
And and people in the U.S. have been for disfavoring or somehow disrespecting someone's gay marriage, even though the idea of a gay marriage would violate their own religious convictions or their deep moral convictions. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I want to head back towards the cutting edge research, the latest from you. But could you just maybe walk us through a little bit of the dialogue that tends to happen when you say, "Oh no, people do change. We know them. This isn't theoretical. They're our friends. We love them, and they could tell you the same thing." What are some of the arguments you regularly encounter? What's some of the pushback on that?
Yeah. So when we're presenting these data, we're going beyond the mere anecdotal, and we're saying here is a body of data that's collected like every other body of data, and it presents hundreds of instances of persons who claim to have changed sexual orientation in one way or another. Now, when I say in one way or another, I should say we measure sexual orientation in three ways, with three kind of aspects. And this theory doesn't come from me, it comes from the US government and many other governments, as we're trying to measure and understand sexual orientation. So there are three aspects that are generally studied in any empirical study, and that would be someone's attraction, who they say they want to have sex with, whether it's men or women or both. And then their sexual behavior, who they report that they actually do have sex with, men, women, both, or something else. And then what they call themselves, whether it's lesbian, gay, straight, or a whole 20 or 30 other options that people can choose from or invent and call themselves. So that would be a measure of attraction, a measure of behavior, and a measure of identification or identity. And those three aspects of sexual orientation are what we talk about when we talk about sexual orientation change. And so if I assert or present data or evidence that persons have changed, how that is met with by mainstream science today is a denial. It's not met with the sense that, well, this is an interesting counterintuitive,
novel approach or novel data set.
Yeah, let's look at what's going on here, and maybe we need to rethink our ideas or get them to rethink their ideas. No, it is excluded. It's met with this ideological opposition, as if it were heresy, really, a form of things that should not be said. So we like to point out in response to these that when they deny change, they're only denying change one way, because they never deny that a person can change from straight to gay. They only deny that you can change from gay to straight. Now, changing from straight to gay is a staple of the development of homosexual identity. Almost every person who declares themselves homosexual have changed from some former declaration. I mean, the process is so well known. It's called coming out. And coming out is a normal process. And it's seen as realizing that you don't have to conform to the heteronormative oppressive binary identity, but you're coming out to recognize yourself as something else. But that's exactly the process of sexual orientation change in reverse that we're reporting to. So apparently you can come out from being heterosexual to being gay or lesbian, but if at some point you want to go back or come out again as being a reconstituted heterosexual, they don't allow that. We also show population evidence that if you do a population survey with repeated measures over different points in time, inevitably you will find that the percent of people who in their teens and early 20s who identify as gay or lesbian is much lower when those same people get into their 30s and 40s. And so there is a natural desistance. It's called fluidity or evolution from identifying as gay or lesbian or engaging in same-sex behavior to engaging in heterosexual behavior. So not only us sort of socially conservative scholars, but across the board, persons who have looked at population studies have discovered that most people who have ever engaged in homosexual sex or identified as homosexual in some way today are heterosexual and engage in heterosexual sex. So just to mention a couple of names, Tony De Silva and his group found this in the Canadian data. Professor Lisa Diamond found this in 4 large population data sets in the UK and in the United States. And so this is not a secret at all, except that it's widely denied. And so these scholars, Lisa Diamond's study is called Scrutinizing Immutability, and it concludes that the claim that persons never change from minority sexual orientation is without scientific basis. She argues that the gay community, the gay activists, should stop claiming that homosexuality is an inborn innate condition because the evidence is so strong against it. Well, her study now is kind of overlooked and not cited along with all of the other studies. So go ahead.
Could I think I recall seeing that one of the psychiatric associations is now changing their tune to some extent. They're saying, well, they're moving the goalpost. They're saying, well, actually, yeah, okay, people do change.
Yes.
You just can't have any influence on it.
That's right.
Well, is that an anti-psychiatry kind of statement?
Well, yeah, you would think so. But what they're saying is it's okay for people to change naturally as they develop in their life and they go through different phases and all. But it's not okay to sit someone down and if this person says, I'm troubled with my homosexual attractions, and try to help them to change.
But this denies sociological impacts of people develop and change all the time because of their relationship with their environment.
Yes,
sometimes that's a therapeutic relationship. That's just, or a religious relationship, or a friend who says something that like.
What really I think upsets them is the idea that anyone would say, this being homosexual is unwanted. I don't want it. And particularly if you are a religious person, and most persons in our data who have changed sexual orientation are very religious, and you say, I think being homosexual, and particularly I think practicing homosexual behavior is a sin. It's a violation of the purity that God calls me to be. And so for my own personal religious reasons, I don't want to do that. Now that really, really angers gay activists. So what they really want to do is to eliminate this idea that anyone could say homosexuality is a sin. It's an unwanted behavior. It is an impediment to reaching full human personhood. And so they want to eliminate that idea.
But just the flagrant irony of a group who throughout the 80s defended the right to say, hey, we exist too.
Yeah.
Could you let us live our life and we'll let you live yours, is the very same group that in a sort of totalitarian bent is saying you must live how we do, and if you don't, you're cancelled, you're out, I reject you, you don't exist.
Yeah.
But surely the best thing would be just to say, look, we're going along this path, and it's okay if you go along this path too. We won't try and outlaw your path. That would be a healthy reflection upon from an oppressed, as allegedly oppressed person, right?
Yes. Well, that would be tolerant. That would be open-minded. That would
maybe allowing diversity, inclusive.
That would be a very liberal society, really, in the classic sense of liberal. But the position they have, unfortunately, it's the ultimate hypocrisy to say that the freedom for someone to choose to adopt a homosexual life requires the restriction or the prohibition for someone to reject a homosexual life in favor of a heterosexual life.
Is that heterophobia?
That would be a word for it, yeah.
I don't use that. I don't want to claim some new victimhood category.
Yeah,
but in an objective sense,
right,
it's actually maligning someone's freedom to choose heterosexuality.
Well, yeah. So it comes from persons who have a functionally Marxist orientation to the world, and in the Marxist world, the conditions that we have are reflection of society, social classes, social norms. And so in order to achieve freedom, I have to change society to conform to the conditions that I have, which means that if you have a different set of conditions or ideals, society will be changed to suppress and eliminate your ideals. So their goal is, I don't think it's a personal, internal rejection like heterophobia, but it's a political opposition to what they call heteronormativity, to the idea that being heterosexual is the primary basis of human society.
Right.
You could extend that to say that there's an opposition to the idea of the man-woman family with their own children. The traditional idea of the family is something that they need to eliminate in order to have the world that they want. Well, that's very explicit in Marx and Marxist theory.
And plus kill God.
Absolutely. So to remake society in a way where any kind of sexual expression is considered okay and normative, you have to eliminate this, what they see as narrow-minded traditional focus on the natural traditional family.
Yeah. And this is what the Bolsheviks tried.
Yeah.
And the fruit was evident. And anyway, the communists decided this wasn't a good idea.
Yeah.
Let's get back to strong Soviet families.
Yeah, so I'm not saying that all LGBT activists are communists, but they operate out of a generally Marxian point of view, or you might say Gnostic point of view, but it's a point of view that opposes a society that is not built around or furthers their freedom to be what they want. Well, if you have a society where people can choose not to be what they want, freely choose not to be what they want, that limits their freedom. I don't know exactly why. I think they may suspect that if people are free to choose not to be gay, a lot of them will. And in fact, that's what happens. A lot of them do. So I think that there is a recognition that without coercion, without political power and suppression, this movement of lots of people living happy gay lives is not going to be sustainable.
Well, I think that large data set you referred to, well, 3 large data sets revealed that for the majority, even having freedom to enter into homosexual life did not stop people from, a large proportion of people, maybe not majority, but deciding that they don't want to remain there.
Yeah.
If the data reveals that, this is not religious data, the secular data reveals that, then we're observing a trend.
Yeah, right. And this random sample survey of the sexual minority population in the United States contains clues that there's lots of dissatisfaction among the LGBT population. For example, one question asks if you could, if someone could change you tomorrow from gay to straight, would you want to do that, right? And 12%, I think it is, say yes, I would want to do that. Now that doesn't sound like much, but if you ask that same question of the heterosexual population, if someone could change you tomorrow from straight to gay, would you want to do that? What percentage would answer yes? Probably like 0.5%, or not many. So there's a lot of relative dissatisfaction in that. And then there's a study that came out that was published by the promoters and the authors of this data set, looking at the effect, looking at the percentage of gay folk who had ever attempted suicide. And they looked at 3 generations, 3 cohorts, the 1960s, the 1980s, and the 2000s. Now, social tolerance and acceptance of gay persons has grown a lot since the 1960s. So on their theory, the distress that would lead to suicide should diminish a lot.
Yeah, especially it's homophobia that causes this. It's a lack of, it's stigmatization, lack of acceptance. That's the root cause of our problems.
And what they found was just the opposite, that the gay folk in the 2000s were about twice as suicidal as those back in the 1960s, that it had decreased since then. So they admit that this is contrary to their thesis, that can't explain these findings.
I mean, many people are coming out. Is it Judith Butler? Many people from feminism saying the sexual revolution failed to accomplish any of the goals that we were sold on. Yeah. It causes distress. It causes objectification of women. It causes sexual violence. It causes broken families, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
That's right.
Yeah. Paul, why don't you tell us about what you've been doing to add to the body of evidence? I found this so fascinating to learn.
Sure. We could just look at some of the findings from this survey. Let's see here. Well, one of the things we said that this group is very religious. We asked how.
Sorry, Paul. Could you just tell us the survey broad strokes? The survey, the group, and
yes. So this is a survey that we asked persons: have you ever in your life had attraction to someone of the same sex? And 88% said yes. Have you ever had sex with someone of the same sex? 78% said yes. Have you ever identified yourself as something other than heterosexual, lesbian, gay, bisexual, two-spirit, whatever? And about 68% said yes. And so we have persons who have, and of course they could answer more than one of these things. So we have persons who, generally speaking, have engaged in same-sex attraction, behavior, identification, but do so no longer. Now most of them identify as heterosexual, and they have left those. So this is, we call it leaving pride behind. You could call it ex-gays, but ex-gays is a more restrictive kind of term, and most of the persons in this survey would reject the label of ex-gay. They don't think of themselves that way. So we said we wanted to know the characteristics of this group in the population. And so we one of the things that people suspect is that they often do this for religious reasons. And we found that that is emphatically true. We asked, how important is religion in your life? 95% of them said it's very important. The highest response that they could give. How often do you go to attend religious services? Over 50% go to church at least once a week or more often, right? Well, in the U.S. population, that's about 4%, right? So they're 10 times more religious than the U.S. population. And in the LGBT population, the percent of persons who identify as LGBT who go to church more than once a week, much less than 1%. I mean, it's very, very small. So then,
Paul, can I just drill down on that for a moment? Because if I'm looking at this through the lens of the zeitgeist, the spirit of this age might say, well, this group of people are in religious fear and they're suppressing their innate identity. And that's why the data reveals that this particular group, because of their religiosity, that's why they're comfortable to deny their innate self.
Yes.
Does the data show something that's true? Does the data speak to that?
Well, you can't get from data what is ontological and what is not. That's a philosophical point of view that you put on the data. But we do address this because we know this question will come up. So in this survey, over 50%, we asked them, how much did you change in attraction? How much in behavior? How much in identity? And over 50% reported, over two-thirds reported that they changed very much, or it was extremely or very much in attraction and in behavior, and over half in identification. So these are people who report that they've changed a lot. Now, did they, in making that change, are they denying who they are and living a lie? Some activists, ideologues would have that response. Or are all these people, they were really bisexual to begin with, right? And so they would say, well, that's just, they're reorienting their terminology. But if you think about what it is that happens when someone reports that they've changed sexual orientation, what they report, and we've drilled down now into other data that's very similar to this, and we're going to do it in this data, but what we found in the other data is that when people report change, they mostly report change in behavior. They don't report so much change in attraction. And so if you think of the Kinsey scale what goes from 0 to 6, 6 is exclusively homosexual, 0 exclusively heterosexual, and then you range in between. There are several features of that argue for an incremental or partial change in sexual attraction being the most common type. And so when people report change in attractions, they report a change of 2 to 3 points on average on the Kinsey scale. So it's not moving from a 6 to a 0, usually. It's moving from a 4 to a 1, or from, so it's moving along that. Well, what that also says is that most persons start out with mixed attractions, because the Kinsey scale, if you have less heterosexual attraction, you have more homosexual attraction, and vice versa. And so 95% of persons who respond to the Kinsey scale don't put themselves at one of the extremes. They put themselves in the middle somewhere, right? So these are suggestions that when a person has same-sex attraction, it is not a statement of their ontological identity. It's a statement of inclinations or tendencies that they are experiencing. If they're younger, they're often trying to figure out what these mean. They're working through them. They're trying to find themselves. The ideology of LGBT normalization says that if you have any same-sex attraction at all, it means that ontologically you are gay, you belong to this class of persons. Right. And if you deny that, then you are denying your true ontological identity.
But why doesn't that apply to heterosexuality when there's clearly a mixed picture? Would we be reasonable to say that anyone, we'd be arrested actually for saying that anyone who had, despite identifying as gay, had experienced heterosexual attraction or had in Australian law, had heterosexual sexual experiences, right. If we were to lay claim that they are actually innately heterosexual, we'd be locked up.
Yeah.
But when there's such a bias.
Yes, it is a bias. And the persons who move against this do so out of a strong religious sense. Well, what does being very religious give you? It gives you another basis for identity. Right. Whether you agree with the religion or not, someone says, I'm a child of God. I'm created in freedom and for fulfillment. And for whatever reason, I'm not finding fulfillment in what I'm doing right now. I want to explore differences. And that those differences often will involve diminishing or moving their sexual orientation. Well, that's not at the root of their identity. And so we have statements in other surveys, in this survey, where the people who have left pride behind reject out of hand the idea that experiencing same-sex attraction is somehow central to their identity. They just say, that's not me. I don't believe that. And so when they do that, then they are free to explore other options. So are they denying their true self, or are they finding their true self? It depends on their point of view. And the point of view of the psychological elites is that they're denying it, but the point of view of the persons who are going through it say, I'm finding my true self.
Yeah. But moreover, there's evidence from that it is organic, or that the data is real when it suggests that there is a change in attraction, because regardless of a religious motivation, you would have no imperative, you would have no reason to falsely report a change in attraction. You could just say, look, I'm adhering to my religion and nothing's changed, but at least I'm obedient. There'd be no reason, compelling religious reason to deny the change in attraction. I think the data's real.
Right, and many of them don't deny the change in attraction. In fact, many of these men seek to be completely free from same-sex attraction, and fail at doing that, and that's painful and difficult. And yet they say, well, I have this same-sex attraction. It's in my head, but it doesn't affect my behavior. And so many of them get married. They're in productive and happy marriages, and their wives are fully attuned to their condition or attractions. And so they say, I'm always going to be same-sex attracted, but it doesn't affect me or affect my life because I don't act on it. It's covered by God's grace. And that narrative is no different than the narrative of sin writ large for us who seek to follow Christ. I'm a very selfish person. I'm going to die a selfish person. I am myself attracted in lots of general ways. But by the grace of God, I am able and free to choose to overcome that, to choose to love other people. And
well, can you imagine if polyamory was established as an ontological category for your average heterosexual man? I've found myself at times attracted to someone other than wife. I'm a new class of being. This is I'm in a sinful world, and God's calling me higher, and I'm not going down that path. And each day, actually, sanctification takes place, and I'm finding that far less relevant in my life and my enjoyment with God.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So it is subject to a lot of restrictions, I think, to reject the idea that being same-sex attraction leads to some ontological change, but in fact, it doesn't. In the experience of these persons who have changed. And if that's true, well, it's a good thing that they outlaw that idea, because once you allow that idea to come in, then you realize that you have the vast majority of the population who are they call themselves heterosexual, as opposed to being homosexual, as if those are two different options or two different ways of living your sexuality. But you find if the homosexual option doesn't have the same coherence, doesn't have the same persistence, doesn't have the same depth of conviction in one's being as the heterosexual option, you begin to realize that this is really not a thing. And so my sense of what's going on is that we have persons who have normal sexual attractions, which means attractions that can lead to the procreation of new life. We forget that sex is for having babies. It's not just for building relationships or having fun, or, it's for having babies. So if you have sex that is capable of having a baby, our being as humans, through evolution and through our typical phenotype and through the creation, however you want to say it, is focused on that. And so in my mind, we have that, and then we have all of these other defections from that, which are many and varied and are transient and fragile, and people struggle with that, and either they come to terms with it or they reject it. But you don't see that happening with people who are heterosexual trying to be homosexual. They don't go to therapists, generally speaking, and say, I'm a really happy, secure heterosexual, but I feel like I should be homosexual. Can you help me work to do? They don't do that much because the struggle comes from the other way. So if you admit the idea that homosexuality may not be acceptable for some people, you end up with the idea that homosexuality it doesn't exist at all. You have people who have normal procreative sexual intents and urges, and then you have everybody else who are struggling with that. And so the whole idea, I don't like to call people heterosexual anymore, because that's as if you're part of a binary, but that binary doesn't exist.
The nice bit about all of that, actually, for anyone who's experiencing non-heterosexual attractions, or I'd go even further, it's not a scientific conversation, this is a spiritual conversation, I would be to say any type of sexual behavior, expression, attraction, or ontological class or self-identity that isn't a part of a procreative plan, part of God's good plan, is going to cause trouble. And it's not limited to LGBT. It includes that category, but it's not limited to that. Actually, anyone who watches porn for 6 hours a day, every day of their adolescence, is going to have a lot of troubles. They're going to need help. Anyone who's a serial romantic obsessed dater is going to find out quickly that is not a good place for the human soul to flourish, whilst it feels good in the moment. Actually, we learned that this incredible procreative power, this wonderful coming together, is so powerful that it actually has incredible restraint around it and needs to. And that developing into the kind of person who can operate those restraints actually helps you grow into a person who has dominion over your own body, who's capable to, with delay or withhold gratification for something higher. It's actually good preparation for being a parent.
Yes.
when all the things your body wants to do have got nothing to do with what you actually have to do. I got young kids, so I'm in that world now. But it's beautiful. That's called growing up into selfless living.
It's called flourishing as a human being. And I want to point out that what you're articulating is resident in religious faith communities today, but it's not a religious idea. It started with Aristotle. Well, maybe at least we know it best through Aristotle, who reasoned that human beings are rational animals. And so he meant that we're like the animals. We have all the animal parts to us, but we are able to be ruled by reason. And so when he and his followers advocate to know yourself, they're advocating to let your life be ruled by your rational faculties, not by your animal urges. The animal urges will lead to destruction, disease, relational difficulties, and a disintegration of society. Yeah. They reasoned this out. It didn't have anything to do with Christian or Islamic or any other kind of scriptures. Yeah. It was a reasoned point of view that they came to, what we might call the natural law. And so what we're doing when we overcome or control our urges is we're learning to be truly human.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And beyond base urges that,
Yeah. Now, in my faith, the Catholic faith, by the grace of God, about 40 years ago, we had an explosion of truth presented by Pope John Paul II called the theology of the body, in which he really expanded on that Aristotelian notion to point out that the human body is constructed in various specific ways that orient men toward women and women toward men, which he called the spousal meaning of the body. So all of us are called, well, first of all, every human being is sexed. We are male or female. There is no human who's not one of those two, right? And in our capacities to one another, it's not just the physical capacity to enter into sexual relations, which involves a certain mechanical complementarity, right? Parts that are made, obviously, a small child can see parts that are made to go with one another, but there's also the whole psychological bent and orientation of male and female to the completion of one another. And so it expands on this notion, even the natural law notion. Now, today, we can extend that to look at the complementarity of male and female to one another, but also to the care of a child. And so we're learning today a lot. You don't know it unless you apply this kind of natural law thinking to it. But we have an explosion of research today that not many people know about that looks at the unique contributions of, let's say, the mother to the development of a child. It's not something a father can do. It's not even something another woman can do, but that mother specifically in her body, in her immune system, in the way that she psychologically relates to her child, her own biological genetic child, and in hundreds of other ways that research is finding out that contributes to the maximum full development of that child. And then the father also, in other ways, contributes to that. And when we lose that, right, we lose full human development.
You don't need to be a sociological researcher to understand that most people who play out sexual dysfunction, whether heterosexual or LGBT, in their adolescence, are usually rebounding against daddy issues. I mean, this is just common in our vernacular. We understand this to be true. You look at the damage that's caused by absent fathers on large in culture. It is devastating to young folks, but a positive bent land on this, and I have just really deep admiration for my friends, Australian friends in the Catholic Church, for the way they welcome young married couples into something much bigger, into here's a process, here's wisdom from many years. Here's what it will mean for two of you to come together for this purpose. Here's a framework to walk in, and accountability and all of that. I think the impetus on us as believers is to show the world what healthy family looks like, is to get to the top of the cliff and look at where we perhaps haven't been the best dads, or anthropologically, and where we need to, and really work to support communities in how to nurture this. I always call it the ordained military unit of the kingdom of God is the biological family. That is responsible for disciple making, responsible for mission, responsible for nurture, responsible for the propagation of the kingdom of God on the earth.
Yes, the Catholics call it the domestic church, and it's the fundamental unit of the church and of society. So we see societies not as made of individuals. That's the Enlightenment notion, but we see society is made up of families. So I don't know if we have one person, one vote, and when you extend that franchise to everyone, then you have this idea that we are all individuals, individually collecting with this larger state or nation. That's not an idea that's conducive to sound civil society. It's better. I'm not against one person, one vote, but it's better if we think of families connected, and families are connected to one another. There's an interconnection of families, so you have this whole kind of network that forms in most societies, clans or neighborhoods or friendship groups, and to have those now that are connected to other more local organizations. You have this thick web of support. And the state, with its coercive power, is way up there somewhere, but doesn't want to interfere with this too much. That's the prescription for freedom in the social sphere. So the family is crucially important, not only to the development of the men and women and individuals involved, and not only to the proper upbringing of children, but to the peaceful order and freedom of the whole society.
And I theorize that what you talked about, overcoming selfishness as the journey of sanctification you're on, I just amen to that, me too. But look at what family does. First of all, when I get with my wife, I joke, but it's true, we realize we don't speak the same language. I've got to yield to otherness. I've got to serve her, and she's got to serve me. And you don't realize you're selfish until you get married. And then you have kids, and you realize, oh wow, I'm really selfish. And they pull at you, and you learn to empty yourself out. Kenosis, you pour out of what you're clinging to for others. I think that's the kind of family unit, of course, but that's actually the kind of individual who will participate well in these meta systems, in systems of government and culture and society better when I learn it's actually not all about me. I've learned from a really young age to yield to others, to make life about others. Maybe that's a positive note to end on. Professor Paul, thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, your research. It's a blessing and an honor.
Thank you, PJ. It's a great honor to be here.
Thanks. God bless.